And it would have been bad enough if Smoot-Hawley had just choked off trade for that reason. What made it even worse was the response of foreign governments. They retaliated. They formally raised their tariffs. They thought, if you're going to do it to us, we're going to do it to you. And so their actions also contributed to the grinding to a halt of much of world trade. One American industry in particular was especially hard hit. And the reason they were hard hit was it was a major export industry. They sold about a third of what they produced in overseas markets. But now those markets were lost at the stroke of a presidential pen because since foreigners couldn't buy the stuff anymore because they couldn't sell to us. What industry am I thinking of?
Oil.
No?
Farming?
No. I'm sure all those were hit, but there's one in particular. You may have seen old newsreels of that harken back to this day. Well, what I'm thinking of is agriculture. A third of what American farmers had been producing was sold in foreign markets. Now they're gone. The old newsreels I'm referring to are the ones that show farmers killing large numbers of baby chicks because it didn't pay to raise them to maturity, or dumping milk into ditches because prices plummeted. Of course they will. We just wiped out a third of markets, and we got the Fed down the street cranking down the money supply, raising interest rates. Prices are plummeting all over the place. Farmers are especially hard hit, and because they're hard hit, this will have a very powerful ripple effect throughout the economy. When you look at bank failures of the period, you'll find that they're not concentrated among big banks in major cities. Thousands of banks in America will go under in the early 30s, but they're almost all in rural areas. The banks that held the farm mortgages. The farmers couldn't pay because of Smoot-Hawley, so the banks went under. And you could have been in something totally remote from agriculture, but you had your money in that bank that was tied to agriculture, and so you were hit hard. By the way, just on the side, did you know that Canada had a depression as deep as ours in terms of unemployment, but didn't have a single bank failure throughout the 1930s? We had thousands of them. Anybody know why? Milton Friedman and Anna Schwartz explained this in their monetary history of the United States. Not a single bank failure in Canada. We had laws in the US called unit banking laws that did not allow banks to invest outside their particular region. So if you were in Peoria, Illinois, you drew your deposits from people in the area, and that's where you had to make your investments. You couldn't open a branch in another state, let alone maybe the other part of the state. It was very difficult to do that, which meant that your eggs were in one basket. In Canada, that wasn't the case. They could be diversified and thereby better able to weather difficulties in any particular sector. But rural banks will go under tremendously in numbers because of Smoot-Hawley and unit banking laws that forbade them effectively from diversifying. They had all their money in the farm economy, and when it fell apart, they did too. So Smoot-Hawley takes a recession and makes it a depression, with unemployment soaring from single digits now well into double digits, approaching 20% within a year. There's another event that happens in this second phase that isn't related to the world economy, but happens before the third phase, so I throw it in here. It happens in 32. 1932, full-scale depression. It's obvious to everybody. Unemployment's way north of 20%. It will peak out around 28% ultimately. And what do you suppose has happened to the federal budget? On the income side, or revenue side, and the expenditure side. On the revenue side, do you think Herbert Hoover, maybe your high school teachers told you that Herbert Hoover was a laissez-faire, stand pat, do nothing, didn't help anybody, spending, cutting president, right? Spending soared under Herbert Hoover. He had his Reconstruction Finance Corporation, his bailout programs, all kinds of stuff, so he had spending going up. What's happening to revenue? It's going through the floor with rising unemployment and bankruptcies. Tax revenue to the government is falling, so you have this huge and growing budget deficit, which by 1932, facing a presidential election in the fall, the incumbent party decides we better do something about. It was alarming to a lot of Americans with good old-fashioned values of, you don't spend more than you have. So what do they decide to do in the midst of a depression with 20+% unemployment to reduce the government deficit? Cut spending? They thought, well, let's try to raise revenue. So in '32, they passed the Revenue Act. Paul Krugman would love this. I mean, Herbert Hoover's doing all the garbage that Paul Krugman advises that never works. So they passed the Revenue Act of 1932 that doubled the income tax. Doubled the income tax. It took the top rate, and more than doubled it, from 24% to 65%. The thought here was, well, we'll get more revenue. What this meant to the average guy was, if you weren't already flattened by Smoot-Hawley and by a contractionary monetary policy, if you still were making some money, chances are we got you this time. Because in 1932, your income tax took a decisive hike. They raised excise taxes, postal rates, all kinds of other stuff in the bill. It wasn't just income taxes. It was the biggest tax hike in American history in the midst of a depression. That's laissez-faire, that's hands-off, stand pat, do nothing. Yet that's the way Hoover is often portrayed. He was the president, and he was busy raising taxes and tariffs and spending all throughout his tenure in office. The budget deficit is not helped, and the economy, needless to say, is not helped either by this substantial hike in taxes. In '32, we have a presidential election. And what a momentous time it was. We had an incumbent, Herbert Hoover, the Republican, renominated by the Republicans, versus the charismatic, silver-tongued orator, governor of New York, former Navy Secretary, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. What's the conventional view from the standard high school history text of this period? Hoover was laissez-faire. Roosevelt had to come in and save us, and presumably that's what he promised to do, in the form of what he ended up giving us. He must have promised us more government. You look at the campaign of '32, he attacked Hoover for all the right reasons. If I maintain to you that Herbert Hoover was not a laissez-faire president, I ask you not to take my word for it. Listen to what Franklin Roosevelt had to say. The 1932 Democratic Party platform on which he ran called for the biggest reduction in federal spending of any major party, proposed by any major party in American political history. 25%. That was in the Democratic Party platform of '32. We get elected, we will cut federal spending by 25% because it's out of control. Roosevelt accused Hoover, and these are his exact words. This is from a speech he gave in several places, but I remember it specifically from history as being given in Pittsburgh, because it's not far from where I was born. In Pittsburgh, he attacked Hoover for presiding over, quote, the greatest taxing and spending administration in American history. His running mate, John Nance Garner from Texas, accused Hoover of, quote, leading the country down the path to socialism. So the next time you have a teacher or professor who says, oh yeah, Hoover was laissez-faire, that didn't work, just quote Roosevelt. And say, how do you explain what Roosevelt was saying? The fact is, Roosevelt was right in '32, but it didn't take very long, a matter of hours, upon his election, when we discovered he had no intention of fulfilling the broad sweep of his promises of delivering less government. That brings me now to the third phase of the Great Depression, the phase of the New Deal. The New Deal. That's the name everybody knows, was given to Roosevelt's package of legislation. A bunch of it ran through Congress in the first 100 days, from March 4, 1933, when he took office, through the spring and into the summer. A raft of legislation designed to try to solve the Depression. We got spending hikes, we got tax hikes, we got all kinds of stuff, but there were two particular aspects of the New Deal, major elements of it that I want to zero in on, because they, more than anything else, explain why the economy didn't recover.